Bom 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 babo, bailo bailo bam bam bam, bailo bailo bam bam badadadam du. Você tem que dar, que prometeu meu bem.
Well, I'm doing my first video on I didn't think I'd be doing it on a film like The Dig, but yeah, I was pleasantly surprised. It's a Netflix film from 2021 starring Ralph Fiennes and Carey Mulligan, and I had a bit of trouble getting into this. I think I must have started twice, 3 times even, and I was just like, I want to watch this, but where's this gonna go? Like, just around a dig. I mean, I'm very into archaeology, sort of loosely. I'm not a fanatic, but I love the idea of a film being about an archaeological dig. So I kept coming back to it, and boy oh boy did it deliver by the end. I was actually moved to tears, and I didn't expect it. It's a really understated film. It sort of really reels you in, and even though Ralph Fiennes he's just proved himself time and time again as one of the best actors. Just chameleon. It's so nice to see an actor that can actually shapeshift. Most actors today, I think, they just deliver lines really well. They wear their costumes really well. They maybe have some facial hair going on, little weight change, but essentially they're the same person that they're in interviews. But then you have true actors like Ralph Fiennes who can go the whole spectrum, go from Schindler's List to Voldemort to Pope to Suffolk digger, which he plays in this film, and he's actually from Suffolk, so it's actually nice to hear his proper Suffolk accent.
We're standing in someone's graveyard, I reckon. Viking? Oh, maybe older.
But actually, Carey Mulligan is really the standout in a way. I mean, not in the sense of performance, but the way she's able to carry the soul of the film. Because I'd say Ralph Fiennes, he's the heart, he's the sort of passion behind the dig. But Carey Mulligan packs a punch, really. Very understated again.
Is that why you want to dig, Mrs. Pretty? Tales of buried treasure?
So basically, Carey Mulligan's character, she is sort of, upper class. It's based on a true story, so it's interesting because it's historical in a few ways, and it's It's kind of very modern period. It's right on the eve of World War II, at least the engagement of the UK. But it's also, it's about a dig looking for ancient history. And then at the same time, it's really not a historical film at all. It could have been set today, but it just happens to be a true story about this woman in Suffolk at the time. Her husband and her bought this estate or inherited the estate, and he dies, prior to the film. And again, this is a true story. They had this massive estate, and they had these mounds that were clearly sort of things that had been buried long ago. And the idea was to, they were sort of amateur archaeologists, and they had this dream to dig it up. But obviously, as I mentioned prior to the beginning of the film, the dad has died. And I think that basically she's a lonely woman, and she has this child. And at some point she thinks, what, I want to continue this dream we had. I'm going to hire a digger and enter Ralph Fiennes. And the interesting thing in the film is the idea of this established, the establishment archaeology, in Ipswich and then further afield in London, versus this sort of kind of working class freelance archaeological digger. So she calls him up, and the beginning's really interesting because they have a bit of a tussle about pay. What's the most interesting about the film is, first of all, the directions I think is really good. It's this Australian guy. I think it's one of his first feature films, and I think he's done really well. I think there's some issues that maybe I'll get onto later, but ultimately it's a sort of triangle character dynamic that we kind of know quite well, you know, like the one in Rome, which is a weird comparison, but, you know, classic one is the sort of the grieving widowed mother who has a son who's, you know, still a child, and then enters this potential new father figure. And, you know, whereas like in Rome, you think maybe Maximus is going to come back to her, even though he's really resentful. Like in this case, I think she knows he's a man from another world. He's working class. She's from the upper class. You know, he's much older, and clearly it's not really, he's almost asexual in that sense, because he has a wife that he's not really that passionate about. For him, the real passion is the dig. For her, it started as the dig, but her interest in the actual excavation starts to wane, as really what takes over is her sense of loneliness and her curiosity to maybe have a more intimate relationship with Ray Fiennes' character. And that's essentially the film sort of plays out as a tragedy, because it's that, you know, sometimes in life, that knowledge that it just can't ever happen. And as much as you might think that might be nice for Carey Mulligan's character, what really hits hard was that eventually we find out that she's got this terminal illness, which is, you know, maybe a bit of a spoiler alert. But what's tragic is that you know, everyone's excited about this dig, but she has to hide it from a kid. She has to then worry about, how is my kid? He's still a child. If I die in the next year, how is my child? Who's going to look after him? But what's tragic is that her interest starts to wane. And as her life starts winding down, it's kind of, yeah, so that part really got me. And so, yeah, like the film is just full of heart, full of longing, full of the impossible, you know, I won't even spoil what they find in the dig. And it's actually incredible, but it's not really the most interesting thing about the film. But if I'm going to leave anything spoiler free, go watch it for what they find. And so this kind of gets me onto some of the tweaks I would have made, you know. And I don't know if this is so much at the writing level as opposed to the direction. And I think it's both. I don't think it's a massive issue. I think it would have been solved, but essentially all these people start to get involved as the dig takes on this bigger significance. And, you know, as I mentioned earlier, you have this establishment archaeological society folk who start to kind of catch on to there's potentially something massive here. And so they'll show up and try to they end up taking over the dig. And there's a bit of a conflict there, which is sort of another interesting part of the film, is, as I mentioned before. But one of the people that she shows up to help is Carey Mulligan's cousin, played by Johnny Flynn, who's this sort of Jack Kerouac, sort of James Dean sort of character, sort of elusive, mysterious, dreamy. You know, he's a photographer, but he's just enlisted in the RAF. He's very just here and not here. He's there, but he's not there. And he's almost like the filmmaker. You know, he's taking pictures of everyone. And I think because, you know, I think this is a studio move, you know, that if Carey Mulligan and Ray Fiennes aren't going to end up together, and, you know, the characters know they're not going to end up together, the audience knows they're not going to end up together, we should have a love story somewhere. And I'm not saying that's a bad idea. I think it's a good idea. But the only problem is that Johnny Flynn's character, the cousin, never, you know, gets involved with the emotional through line of the film, which is Carey Mulligan and Ray Fiennes. He's always on the periphery. He's always, you know, and I think that's part of that, you know, the character. He's this nomadic guy who's comes in, comes out. He's going off to war. And one of the society couples that come in from the archaeological sort of group. There's this sort of no love lost between them. It's sort of, he's a closeted gay man and she's a young woman who may be married too early, and she starts to kind of grow this attraction towards Johnny Flynn's character. And the only issue is this, that it feels completely added on, because Johnny Flynn, again, his character, and I think at the production level, they should have just thought, we need some scenes with Johnny Flynn. Maybe they had scenes, maybe they took him out in the edit, maybe there's a director's cut somewhere, but Johnny Flynn is too incidental. He's too sort of like a ghost in the film. So very intriguing, but if he was involved with Carey Mulligan, if whether it's with her illness and with the child, I think that would have just made the film even better. But that's just a small thing, because I actually think overall it's really refreshing. Just, it's grounded. It's not about how big the ideas are, how interesting the premise is. It's just, as I say, full of heart, full of history, and just full of just real people, just like in a slightly unusual circumstance. Not everyone's trying to dig their garden up for artifacts, but yeah, I would highly recommend it. So yeah, let me know what you think about it if you saw it.